Good evening. It is, whatever time it is, 7:54. It's Wednesday evening Bible study. We'll be starting in about 6 minutes. Right. And that would be my phone alerting me that Elk City United Methodist Church has just gone live. Imagine that. Oh, and there's only one person watching. It's just me. And you, who's rewinded back to the beginning of this video for some strange reason. Alright. Live video URL. Cool. Claudine Anspaugh is watching. Hello, Claudine. If you're just tuning in, we'll get started in about 8 minutes, something like that. John Bowie says hello. Hi, John. Glad you're here. And Gwen Pasby is listening tonight. John says this should be good for the drive home from work. Ah, that's perfect. Well, I hope your connection stays stable the whole time. Maggie Miller waves. Hi, Maggie. I'm glad you could join us tonight. And we'll really get started here in about 7 minutes, something like that. It's first half of Zechariah tonight. So, and if you haven't read Zechariah, then you can read it, once you get home from your drive or something like that. So. Right. And like I said, if you're just joining us, give it about 7 minutes, something like that, and we'll really get started. I think we're good. See, now that I know that Dr. Bowie is listening, I feel like I shouldn't have any dead air. Otherwise he's just going to be driving in silence. And listen, the drive from Weatherford to Elk City is not particularly exciting from what I could, especially not at not at night, not in the dark. It's not so bad during the day. That's at least a pretty part of the drive. But at night, it's pretty boring. I-40 in general is just not the best. But at least you can do it faster now. Mostly. All right. And it started about 6 minutes, 5 minutes, something like that. All right. Oh, I'm sorry, Maggie. She commented, so I'll read it. Maggie says, I gotta go. Nixon got into the toilet water. Nixon is her year and a half, 2-year-old son. That's not fun. So, Vicky Chambers is tuning in. Hello, Vicky. Welcome. Glad to have you here. We got a lot of people tonight already. And a chatty group, too. That's just perfect. And Vicky says hello to everybody. John Bowie says, but the Cedar Canyon area by Hinton and the river is pretty. Yes, I would agree with that. I, for the first time, kind of towards the beginning of the pandemic, when we had been trapped inside for who knows how long, and I finally needed to get out, I sent a message to a friend of mine and said, "Hey, we should go hiking." And so I went down to the canyon for the first time, and man, that is a pretty area, and you would just never know it driving by. So that was awesome. Marty is here. Always glad to see you, Marty. You've been here just every week, and I appreciate that. We got about 3 minutes left, and we'll get going. Just giving everybody the chance to hop on. This is kind of fun. I like this is it's like being a radio host. I probably shouldn't say that. That sounds really self-centered, but I've really been enjoying this. So I was talking with Pastor Scott today, and we did this initially because the pandemic was on, and we didn't know when we'd have in-person stuff again, or how much in-person stuff we could do, and that sort of thing. And honestly, I've had so much fun doing this, and I think it's so effective just to have a good presence, a good Facebook presence, and then a good online presence. So, people are curious about checking out the church, they can see us online or something like that, and kind of get a sense of the sort of things we talk about and the sort of things we do here, and or people can just catch up later or whatever. So I like I said, I think it's a really good idea. I've been having a lot of fun. So maybe it's not on Wednesdays forever, but I think I'll probably be doing some kind of online study for a long time. So. And just so you know, this is decaf. I'm not a monster. Not that it would affect me very much anyway. All right. And we got about 2 minutes. I think we got everything ready. Deborah says, "Good evening." Hi, Deborah. Good to see you. Glad to have you here. We'll be getting started in about 2 minutes, minute and a half, something like that. I wish I could learn how to do like a countdown timer or something like that, so everyone knew exactly when we were going to start. But otherwise, now I have to be the countdown timer, so that's fine. All right, we'll get started in just about a minute here. All right. We got 9 viewers. Pretty good for a fall Wednesday. And there's lots of other stuff to be doing. All right. Okay. I'm going to hold up my hands for the edit. Actually, I'm going to write down. Oh, I don't have a pencil with me, so I can't write down. Well, I can just use my pen, my marker here. We're going to go at about... I'm learning how to better edit the video so that when I put it onto Facebook, we don't have all the random weirdness. So, okay. All right, we're going to get started. Let me put my hands to help the edit. Good evening. It is Wednesday night. It is time for Wednesday evening Bible study. This is week 10 of our 12 weeks through the Minor Prophets, looking especially for the hopeful things that we find in the Minor Prophets. Tonight we're actually beginning a two-parter. One of the more difficult books in the Minor Prophets in the canon is the book of Zechariah. And it's difficult for a lot of different reasons. So if any of you all have already read it, I'd love for you to share your difficulties in the comments. But Zechariah is difficult, first of all, because Zechariah is messy in terms of how it's put together. Next week, we're going to be reading from the latter half of Zechariah, but some of the stuff that's said in the latter half of Zechariah, Jesus quotes it and says that Jeremiah was the one who said it, or at least it's quoted in the New Testament. And so a lot of people, the second half of Zechariah, which feels a lot different than the first half and deals with completely different things, a lot of scholars have said, something's not adding up here. Maybe, originally this was part of Jeremiah or part of another book or its own thing or something like that. We kind of don't know how it got into Zechariah because it doesn't really have that much to do with what the rest of Zechariah is about. The second thing that's really difficult about Zechariah is that it deals with visions. And visions in the Bible only happen in a few places. We've seen a couple of them in the prophets so far, but Zechariah's visions tend a lot more toward a different type of vision and a different type of literature. And we're going to get to that in a little bit. But that makes Zechariah pretty hard to understand. Before we get to all that, though, it's going to be important that we remember where Zechariah is and what is happening. On the board behind me, I've had this timeline up for the whole time, and where we are right now is that the Judeans have gotten back from the exile. They are back in Jerusalem. They are back in that area. And they are faced with having to rebuild after being gone for a generation. And a lot of the characters during this time are central to just a handful of books of the Bible: Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, which we read last week, and Zechariah. And you'll remember from Haggai that there were 3 or 4 really important people at the time. The first was this guy named Zerubbabel. And Zerubbabel was descended somehow from King David. And so there was a lot of hope put in Zerubbabel because since he was descended from King David and now he was the kind of governor of the region, he was appointed by the Persians, and the Persians being the empire that's currently in control. He was appointed by the Persians, but there was still a feeling of, this is good. We have someone from David that's in charge. We get to rebuild the temple. We get to rebuild our city with the walls and everything. It's a very hopeful time. Another important figure was Joshua. And this is not the Joshua that was related to Moses, nor, this is Yeshua. No, we're not talking about Jesus either. But this fellow Joshua was the first one to be the high priest. And that's not a role that had existed before, at least not really. And so you have Zerubbabel, the king, or not the king, the governor, and then you have Joshua, the high priest, and then you have a couple of prophets. You have Haggai and you have Zechariah. We read what Haggai had to say, and Haggai, it was all hope. It was all good times. Or we're gonna rebuild this temple, and God is gonna come back. And we're going to have God honored in our city again, and everything's going to go well again. And Zerubbabel is just the man of the hour. He is appointed for this. And I mentioned last week that it's a little bit odd that Haggai goes in so hard on Zerubbabel when he just kind of disappears, not just from the Bible, but from history. We don't know what happened to Zerubbabel. We don't know why. By the time of Jesus, and people are talking about, well, a descendant of David will one day be on the throne. It's like, well, why not? You had Zerubbabel. What happened? And we don't know. That is just something that is lost to history. We don't know what happened to Zerubbabel and his kids. So Zechariah is going to have a little bit more measured. Zechariah is a lot more interested in the temple and the future of the temple. And there's kind of two temples for Zechariah. And this is where things get a little bit weird with Zechariah. Again, because he's having these strong visions, he becomes really hard to interpret. To think about visions, I'm actually I haven't done this for a while, but I wanted to do this. I want to read you all a poem. This is from the modern era. This is only from like 100 years ago, not even that much. And think about what this poem is about. But notice that that word that it's about is never said. Listen to this poem. It's by T.S. Eliot. It says, "We are the hollow men. We are the stuffed men, leaning together, headpiece filled with straw. Alas, our dried voices, when we whisper together, are quiet and meaningless, as wind in dry grass or rat's feet over broken glass in our dry cellar. Shape without form, shade without color, paralyzed force, gesture without motion. Those who have crossed with direct eyes to death's other kingdom remember us, if at all, not as lost, violent souls, but only as the hollow men, the stuffed men." Now, what T.S. Eliot, and this is part of a longer cycle of poems, including the famous line, "This is how the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper." What he's really writing about there, it has to do with World War I and veterans coming home from World War I and the world after World War I. But the imagery there is very clearly about scarecrows. And he uses the imagery of scarecrows to tap into some of the stuff that we feel about scarecrows. Scarecrows are sort of lonely. They sit out in the field all day. They don't really do anything. They have no brain. If you want to think about Wizard of Oz, they're a little bit frightening. They're a little bit spooky, maybe. No one cares much about them. And without ever saying the word scarecrow, first of all, we know exactly what he's talking about, and second of all, he has made us feel a very particular feeling, a very particular mood that. If he had just said, well, the people got home from World War I and they were sad and listless and just no one paid attention to him anymore and it was a sad time, that would not, I'm not a poet. That's not a very good poem. But this is a very good poem because of what it does in terms of putting an image into your head and a feeling. The problem comes, imagine if you were to read this poem, but not really know what a scarecrow was, or if you never knew anything about scarecrows and never really given them much thought, it could be that it doesn't evoke anything in you. It's just kind of strange words. Hollow, stuffed men, why is there straw? It's very confusing. But since most of us probably know what a scarecrow is, or at least have an idea of what a scarecrow is, we feel a particular way. So, Zechariah is going to use a lot of images, and the images that he uses are intended to evoke a particular image, sorry, that's redundant, but they're meant to evoke a particular feeling and particular associations. But since we're 2,500 years removed, we don't necessarily know always what he's trying to refer to. For us, T.S. Eliot is referring to scarecrows, and that's perfectly obvious. But when we're reading Zechariah, what might have been obvious to people 2,500 years ago may not be obvious to us. The thing about visions in the Bible is that when people get a hold of them, they can often be sort of used for unscrupulous purposes. They can be interpreted in a really poor way. So, Zechariah belongs to one of a very, very few amount of books in the Bible that have this word attached to them called eschatological or eschatological. That's a big word, and usually it means with having to do with the end times. I don't really like that definition so much. Eschatological writings are a little bit different, and here's the example that I always use. I came home from work one time when I was living at my last parsonage, and I flipped on the TV, and I had left it on mute the night before, and so when I turned on the TV, there wasn't any sound. And I didn't pay much attention to it. I just turned it on, and then I got busy in the kitchen. And then I turned, and I looked, and so the screen was on, and there was this very strange shot, and it was a nice house in a really sort of picturesque scene, and a man was walking away from the house, and then the camera sort of like zoomed way out, and the man kept walking, and the man kept walking, and the man kept walking, and would zoom out again. And I remember saying to myself, that's a weird vision there, or a weird cinematography. What's going on? And so I had the thing where you can rewind. So I rewound, turned on the volume, and watched again. And this time what happened is this swelling music started playing, and it was this very sad, very dramatic music. And it turned out a voiceover came in, and what was being depicted was the man walking off to war. And he didn't know if he was ever going to come back, because he had been drafted, and he was going off to fight in the war, and he might never come back. And suddenly, the music made sense, and the cinematography made sense. Everything made sense because of the music and then the voiceover. There was a dramatic weight to that scene that I wouldn't have known if it weren't for the music and the voiceover. Eschatological writings are like a music and a voiceover. They give import to what otherwise might be very mundane times. A lot of what we're doing, really what we're doing in church, in religion in general, is we are looking for a better understanding of what's happening in the world around us. And we need an interpretive lens. And so, that's what I and every pastor really does, is we say, this that's happened in your life, what's happening in your life right now and in the world, and the thoughts that you're having and the things that you're experiencing, here's what they mean theologically. Eschatology does that, but it does so by really dramatic signs and symbols, and angels flying through the air, and flying scrolls, and trumpets sounding, and really sort of terrifying visions. Now, the most famous eschatological book in the Bible is the book of Revelation. Daniel also has some eschatology, and you get little bits and pieces of it here, but it's a language like poetry, like other forms of literature, where if you don't know what you're looking at as you go into it, and you don't know what to expect, it can be really easy to misinterpret what's going on. And so while there are symbols and codes and those sorts of things happening in eschatological writings like Revelation and like in Zechariah, they are never encoded so that only certain brilliant minds in later times can figure it out. They were encoded for the people hearing it, in the same way that a scarecrow is encoded inside of T.S. Eliot's poem. You have to be... the people that heard it originally would have understood what the symbols meant and what was being implied. But by using this kind of fantastic language and imagery, for people that didn't have paintings, really, didn't have certainly movies or things like that, words were their evocative image. It's how they got to see things that weren't visible normally. So that's what Zechariah is doing. And there are 7, 8 visions inside of Zechariah. And more than anything else, I just want to go through what those visions are, and we can talk a little bit about what they mean. So let's go to Zechariah, and as usual, I forgot to mark my place before the Bible study started, so I'll have to find it. But there we go. And some of you might have Bibles. I do in my New Revised Standard Version. You might actually have the visions sort of laid out for you already, but I'll let you know exactly where we're going to look. One of the other cool things about Zechariah is that he's clearly working at the same time as Haggai. In fact, most scholars think that somebody went through and added some superscriptions to Zechariah's words to make it absolutely clear that this is happening at the same time as Haggai. They are working together. So, all right, let's look first at chapter 1, starting in verse 7. On the 24th day of the 11th month of the month of Shabbat, yada, 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 the word of the Lord came to the prophet Zechariah, and Zechariah said, in the night, I saw a man riding on a red horse. He was standing among the myrtle trees in the glen, and behind him were red, sorrel, and white horses. Then I said, what are these, my lord? And the angel who talked with me said to me, I will show you what they are. So this is something also. A lot of times the explanation for the vision is given. And if the explanation for the vision is given, why, that's a pretty good place to start in terms of understanding it. Lots happening here already. There are myrtle trees in a glen. That word glen in Hebrew can mean a lot of different things, but sort of like a valley or even kind of just like a deep place. Think of a deep place that's fertile enough to grow myrtle trees. This is going to be where water is coming through. There's going to be a lot of power and a lot of mystery and a lot of it's going to feel alive there. And so this is a place of power. And myrtle trees are big, bushy, and beautiful trees. So this is already a very beautiful scene, but it's happening at night. So how can we really see the myrtle trees? And when you're reading eschatological literature, always draw out the images like this. If we were in person and I didn't just have this little board here and would have to be turning around, I'd actually be drawing these out even a little bit because that's what we're intended to do. So these myrtle trees, and then there's a man on a red horse, and then suddenly there are more horses there. So we have 4 horses. This does not have anything to do with 4 horses that you might know from Revelation. These are not the 4 horses of the apocalypse. So Zechariah, verse 9, says, what are these, my lord? The angel who talked with me said to me, I will show you what they are. So the man who was standing among the myrtle trees answered, they are those whom the Lord has sent to patrol the earth. Then they spoke to the angel of the Lord, who was standing among the myrtle trees. We have patrolled the earth, and lo, the whole earth remains at peace. Interesting. So really what we have here is a dramatic way to show that God, who in the Old Testament and even into the New Testament, is always surrounded by a retinue. The image here is of a king with his court, except instead of just, a couple people playing music and a couple people hanging around, it's the most magnificent court, and there are people everywhere, and he has people waiting on him hand and foot, and he can send people, and there are thousands of angels all around. There's glory and hoopla and just, all this stuff that's going on, and including messengers. And so what we have here is we have an angel working as angels are supposed to work, as messengers. That's what the word angel really means, both in Hebrew and in Greek. It's messenger. And what we have is one of these 4 horsemen is also acting sort of as Zechariah's interpreter. He's going up and talking to God and then coming back and saying, here's what God said. And this is going to happen so much so that sometimes it's just going to say, well, God said, even though the angel is clearly still there. And all of the horses, they're the ones that have been sent out to patrol the earth, but they're all in the same place, and they're hiding under these myrtle trees. So the image here is that whatever mission they've been on, they're done. That patrolling is done. They have seen what it is that they're going to see. They've seen the whole earth, and they've come back and they're reporting. So God is seeing the whole earth. And so we start with this wide shot of the whole earth more or less being at peace. Verse 16 says this really well. Therefore, thus says the Lord, I have returned to Jerusalem with compassion. My house shall be built in it, says the Lord of hosts, and the measuring line shall be stretched out over Jerusalem. So he's seen everything, and he's come back to Jerusalem, and these people now that are living in this small, dilapidated Jerusalem, a shadow of its former self. They say Jerusalem at this, actually the whole of Israel at this time, the whole of Judah rather, was no larger than the city of Chicago. No, actually, I looked it up. It's no larger than Beckham County. That's how big Israel is at this time. And so it's small, and Jerusalem is small, and it's dilapidated, but God has returned. God has returned from everything that God was doing in the world. God has returned. Second vision. I looked up, and I saw, sorry, this is in verse 18. I looked up, and I saw 4 horns. I asked the angel who talked with me, what are these? And he answered me, these are the horns that have scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem. Numbers are always going to be important in eschatology. Numbers have a certain meaning, and 4 almost always has to do with like the 4 corners of the earth, or the 4 winds of the earth. The earth has 4 sides or 4 corners, I guess, in the image. And so if you have 4 of something, that means that they are covering the entire earth. The question I ask myself is, what sort of horn is this? Is this like a horn on top of your head that you could use to ram somebody, or is this a horn that you blow? And of course, then I realized, wait, those are the same thing. The original horns that you would, blow to make a noise were made out of the horns of animals, and so they're the same thing. But this in particular, the image here is of war horns. When you heard a cry on a horn and you looked up and you saw an enemy army coming, you knew that bad things were going to happen. So horns always mark war and battle. And now he's looking up and seeing horns, and these are the horns that have scattered Judah and Israel and Jerusalem. So for years, centuries, they've just been being battered by all these different empires. But then the Lord showed me 4 blacksmiths, and I asked, what are they coming to do? He answered, these are the horns that scattered Judah so that no head could be raised, but these have come to terrify them, to strike down the horns of the nations that lifted up their horns against the land of Judah to scatter its people. Blacksmiths are tough, they're strong, and they work iron, and probably these horns are made out of iron. And so these blacksmiths have come along to mess up these horns. They will never blow again, and Israel will be protected. All right. Third vision. At the beginning of chapter 2. I looked up and saw a man with a measuring line in his hand. Then I asked, where are you going? He answered me, to measure Jerusalem, to see what is its width and its length. And the angel who talked with me came forward, and another angel came forward to meet him, and said to him, run, say to that young man, Jerusalem shall be inhabited like villages without walls, because of the multitude of people and animals in it. For I will be a wall of fire all around it, says the Lord, and I will be the glory within it. So the man, image of another angel, another heavenly being of some kind, is going to measure. Because we have to know how wide Jerusalem is and how tall Jerusalem is, because we're going to build a wall. But this wall is not going to be one of stone. It is going to be a wall of fire. This harkens back a little bit to some of the images in Jeremiah, but it shows that God's presence in Jerusalem is not just going to be contained to the temple. It's not just going to be watching from above, but it's actually going to be a hedge of protection around Jerusalem. Of course, there was never actually a wall of fire around Jerusalem. This is imagery. We're seeing an image, a wall of fire around Jerusalem. It's a wall of protection. Um, all right. There's a little interlude there, and maybe we can get back to it if we have time, but I'm already, of course, going over time. No one will be surprised. Um, let's jump over to the fourth vision that begins at the beginning of chapter 3. So far, we started way zoomed out, and now we're zooming in. So it started off with all the world, and then it was, you know, Israel and Judah and Jerusalem. And the third vision was Jerusalem by itself. And the fourth, we're going to get back to talking about Joshua, which means we're going to zoom in on the temple, and we're going to zoom in on one person that's important in the temple. Chapter 3 is also going to introduce another character. And see when you see him come in. Then he showed me the high priest Joshua standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at the right hand to accuse him. And the Lord said to Satan, "The Lord rebuke you, O Satan. The Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Is not this man a brand plucked from the fire?" Joshua was dressed with filthy clothes as he stood before the angel. The angel said to those who were standing before him, "Take off his filthy clothes." And to him he said, "See, I have taken your guilt away from you, and I will clothe you with festal apparel." And he goes on and gives more clean clothes to Joshua. So this is a strange image. We've already talked a little bit about God sitting at his court. He's got all these people around. What is Satan doing there? This is one of the more important things we have to remember is that the depiction of Satan kind of changes in different places in the Bible. Satan acts in a different way in different places in the Bible. By the time we get to Revelation, Satan is depicted as this sort of like anti-God. He's the opposite of God. He's the incarnation of all evil. If we get to do a Revelation class, we'll talk about that more then. Right here, Satan has a much different role. This is why it's important to remember what Satan means in Hebrew, which is the accuser. His job is to be kind of like the prosecuting attorney. He is the one, and he sits there in the court, and he's the one that says, Joshua isn't any good. I think you ought to condemn him. And I'm going to argue my case. That's what I'm going to do. We see the same thing in the book of Job. That's how the Dark One acts in Job. He's an accuser. It says, let me show you that Job is not really as good or as powerful, or not powerful, but is not as good or as righteous as you think he is. And so that's how Satan is acting here. He's this accuser, this prosecuting attorney. And so, God listens to what Satan has to say and then says, no, I am going to clear him of everything. He actually never says, no, I don't believe you, and Joshua is not guilty. But instead, while Satan is sitting there saying, no, guy needs to be condemned, needs to go away, or that's implied sort of what's being said, what God does is cleans, takes away the guilt, takes away the stain, and makes Joshua holy so that Joshua can be the high priest. But we get a few interesting things here in the second part of the third chapter. Look especially at verse 8. Now listen, Joshua, high priest, you and your colleagues who sit before you, for they are an omen of things to come. I am going to bring my servant the branch. For on the stone that I have set before Joshua, on a single stone with 7 facets, I will engrave its inscription, says the Lord of hosts, and I will remove the guilt of this land in a single day. On that day, says the Lord of hosts, you shall invite each other to come under your vine and your fig tree. All right. This is why Zechariah gets quoted a lot in the New Testament. Um, for those of us that are steeped in the Christian faith, this sounds very, very much like we're referring to Jesus. We'll get to that in a little bit. But let's interpret it in its place first. This branch has to do with David. Has to do with literally like a family tree. There are branches on a family tree, and who is going to be the branch of David? And people are thinking, oh, Zerubbabel? Are we going to have a king from David again? Is that what's going to happen? And it really seems like that's what's happening, because this stone with the 7 facets, that was one of the emblems of royalty. The Queen of England has a crown. Other kings have scepters or rods or other things that they might have. The king of Israel or Judah had a stone that had gems within it. And so Joshua has been given this stone. The word here is that Joshua is going to crown the next king. And so this is a really hopeful thing for the people that are hearing this. We have a high priest, and this high priest has the power and perhaps the ability, and perhaps is going to crown the next king. 5th vision in chapter 4. This one's a little bit more complicated. We're going to have to work with this one. The angel who talked with me came again and wakened me as one is wakened from sleep. Probably at one point this stood in the very center of all these visions. Some people have said that perhaps the story of this vision having to do with Joshua might have been added in later. They thought it flowed better, but probably originally this 5th vision was the very core, the very middle. And so that's why he has to awaken from sleep, because it's the most powerful, the most dreamlike, and he's seeing the most. His eyes have to be opened the most in order to be able to see it and understand it. What do you see? And I said, I see a lampstand all of gold, with a bowl on the top of it. That's hard to imagine. There are 7 lamps on it, with 7 lips on each of the lamps that are on top of it. So probably what's being imagined here is that the 7 branches of this lampstand have sort of curved back in, and they've got a bowl sitting on top of it. And then each part of the lampstands has 7 wicks on it. And so it's 7 times 7 in terms of the number of lights that are on this thing. 7 has all sorts of implications, but it has to do with completeness, it has to do with power, and it has to do with God. And the most important 7 were, of course, the 7 days of creation. And then, lo and behold, what do we have if we continue reading here? 7 lips in each of the lamps that are on top of it. And then verse 3, and by it there are 2 olive trees, one on the right of the bowl and the other on its left. Now, where in the Bible before have we seen 2 important trees? Everything here is conjuring up the Garden of Eden. Verse 4, I said to the angel who talked with me, what are these, my Lord? And the angel who talked with me answered me, do you not know what these are? I said, no, my Lord. He said to me, this is the word of the Lord to Zerubbabel, the king, or the branch of David. Not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. What are you, O great mountain? Before Zerubbabel you shall become a plain, and he shall bring out the top stone amid shouts of grace, grace to it. Moreover, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, the hands of Zerubbabel have laid the foundation of this house, his hands shall also complete it. Then you will know that the Lord of hosts has sent me to you. And so this is a sort of designation of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel is going to be the one to finish the temple. Zerubbabel is really going to... these are words of hope. And then going on at the end of verse 10, these 7 are the eyes of the Lord, which reign through the whole earth. Then I said to him, what are these 2 olive trees on the right and left of the lampstand? And a second time I said to him, what are these 2 branches of the olive trees, which pour out the oil through the 2 golden pipes? Now, we haven't heard that before. So we're adding on to this image here. He said to me, "Do you not know what these are?" I said, "No, my lord." And he said, "These are the two anointed ones who stand by the Lord of the whole earth." All right, so trees and olive oil that's just it's like there's kind of like a tap. They've put it in and it's just leaking out olive oil. Remember, olive oil has to do with fertility. It has to do with growth. It has to do with good things. Um, and these two anointed ones who stand by the Lord of the whole earth. Kind of the image that's being built here is that um, God's kind of two primary ministers. You know, people that stand by the throne are the ones that go and do the work. You know, God says go do this or go do that. Well, the two ministers that are sitting there by the throne now are have to do with goodness and fertility. And then there's this whole image of creation and of Eden. There's a new creation being made here. That's what we're seeing here, is that, you know, from this, in this vision, the lampstand, which has to do with the temple, that's where the famous lampstand was that burned all the time and was very visible. The lampstand is going to be rebuilt, but it's going to be better than the old one because the old one only had 6 and this one has 7. And so the temple is going to be rebuilt, the lampstand is going to be there, and God is going to be the ruler of the whole earth. And he's going to minister with goodness and life and fertility. All right, 6th vision. Again, I looked up and I saw a flying scroll, and he said to me, "What do you see?" I answered, "I see a flying scroll. Its length is 20 cubits, its width 10 cubits. He said to me, "This is the curse." Strong word. "This is the curse that goes out over the face of the whole land. For everyone who steals shall be cut off according to the writing on one side. Everyone who swears falsely shall be cut off according to the writing of the other side." This is a flying scroll. This is sort of weird. We don't really know what that means, and scroll is one of those, you know, it could be like a rug or a carpet or something like that. But the image here, though, is that the writing on the scroll is sort of visible to everybody. Because it's up above and it's flying, and so everybody can see this, and everyone knows what's written on it. This has to do with purity. The people are all going to follow the instructions of God, the requirements of God, the Torah, the law, because they're all going to know it. You know, this speaks to images in the Bible of, you know, I will write my words upon their heart. This is sort of the same thing. Everyone can see it. And so everyone's going to behave, and that's what the curse part comes in. It's like everyone's going to behave because it's right there, and if not, I guess something bad's going to happen to you. All right, we're on to the 7th vision. We got one more after this. The angel who talked with me came forward and said to me, "Look up and see what this is that is coming out." I said, "What is it?" He said, "This is a basket coming out." Some of you might have the words ephah instead of basket, because that's one of those words it's really hard to translate from Hebrew. He said, "This is their iniquity in all the land." And a leaden cover was lifted, and there was a woman sitting in the basket, and he said, "This is wickedness." Probably what is being imagined here is the reason that this is a woman out of nowhere is not because, you know, women are evil. That's not what this is trying to say. Probably what's being referred to here is a particular female deity. There were some that were really popular, including one that was sometimes called the Queen of Heaven, known as Asherah. And probably the idea here is that the wickedness that comes from worshiping this false idol is being put in a basket, and it's being put away, and the fact that this basket has been closed and nobody has to worry about this woman anymore, that in and of itself is to be, you know, is a sign of God's glory and God's honor. And notice also the way that we're zooming back out. We got all the way into the temple and to Joshua, and now we're zooming back out the other way. So the 6th vision, the scroll covers Jerusalem. And then the 7th vision, it's all of Israel, because of where it's the land of Shinar, so where the basket is being taken away. So we're zooming out, and so we know that this 8th vision is going to have something to do with the whole world. chapter 6, eighth vision. And again I looked up and saw 4 chariots coming out from between 2 mountains, mountains of bronze. The first chariot had red horses, the second chariot black horses. I thought for a while that the colors had to be like important somehow. As it turns out, they're not. Go figure. It's just good imagery. What are these, my lord? The angel answered me, these are the 4 winds of heaven going out, presenting themselves before the Lord of all the earth. The chariot with the black horses goes to the north, the white goes to the west, the dapple ones go to the south. He said, go and patrol the earth. So they patrolled the earth. Then he cried out to me, lo, those who go toward the north country have set my spirit at rest in the north country. Basically, with the work in Jerusalem being done, now God is going out and God is going to do all of this to the rest of the nations. And we see that, we saw it back in chapter 2, and we also get this vision in chapter 6, in the rest of chapter 6, that all the nations of the world are going to come and be present. And so God, having put all the world at peace, is going to put Jerusalem at peace and is going to rebuild the temple. And from there, and radiating outward, is going to come peace on all the earth. And that's the message that Zechariah is giving here in these visions. And Zechariah could have just said that. He could have just said, God is going to bring peace to all the earth, and all the people could have gone, yay! But we wouldn't remember that. It's not an interesting image. What we said here is we have all these images, and we just have a feeling of how God's going to do this and what God is going to do. And that's what eschatological literature really does, is it gives a sense of weight, a sense of importance, and a sense of drama to everything that's happening. And so that's what the first half of Zechariah is all about. There is a little sermon that's given over the next couple of chapters. I'm not going to go into that tonight. I'm already way past my normal time. But Zechariah is, even though it's scary and weird, because we have these angels and these horses and all this stuff going on, this is a very hopeful message, and a reminder that just because it didn't come true in the way that Zechariah saw it as something that was going to happen in his time, doesn't mean that it's, again, not true in the broader sense. And this is where we can bring Jesus back into the conversation, which is that Jesus fulfills these prophecies, but not because Zechariah was only seeing Jesus, but because when Jesus fulfills these prophecies, that's God's way, that's Jesus' way of saying, hi, I'm God and I'm still at work. And all those things that were seen and were promised and were envisioned by the prophets, God, I'm still doing those things. I am still working in the world, and I'm still going to bring that kind of peace, yes, in the temple, yes, in Jerusalem, but to all the world. That's been my whole goal from the beginning, all the way back from Abraham, was a blessing to all the nations. And Jesus continues that work. And so it's very appropriate when the gospel writers, when Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John are writing their gospels, they want to say, listen, this is God's next step. The same God that was doing all of this back here in the prophets. This is God's next step, and we can see it because of how Jesus is just lining up with everything that's happening. All right, well, my voice is completely gone. Believe it or not, I cannot talk for 40 minutes straight without having to take a breath. Be interested to hear if you all have anything to say. I see we've had a couple more joining us since I've been here, so I'm going to go get a sip of water, and I will be right back. If you all have any questions or comments, I'd love to share them and read them with everyone else. That's always my favorite part. So I'll be right back. All right. So, had a few great people join us. Linda Rule says hello. Good to see you, Linda. And Barbara Blake has said hello to all. We miss you, Barbara. Good to see you. Good to have you online. So, all right. Yeah, I had lots of people with us tonight. It was a good night for having people around. I said different people in and out. And always, I'll remind people, if you have not, if you haven't been here the whole time, if you've got late or something like that, or haven't been watching these, we have uploaded all of these to YouTube, along with Pastor Scott's Bible study. So I come in the morning, and Thursday morning, first thing I do is to edit this video and upload it to YouTube, and so either here or on YouTube you can see this entire series that we've done. I'm just looking forward to that, because when we're done, I'll we'll have an entire Bible study on the Minor Prophets just available to watch forever. Same thing with Pastor Scott, who's working on Psalms and Proverbs. We get to have that forever, which I just think is super cool. So all right. I haven't seen anybody with any messages. I'm going to give a couple more minutes, because there's about a minute delay in between when I actually talk and then when it gets recorded, whenever you actually see it. So you're seeing me on like a minute delay, something like that. So I always want to watch just a little bit longer. Make sure no one has anything super thoughtful to say. Nope, I think I see a lot of people logging off for the night, so that makes sense. All right, you all. Had a great evening with you all, and hope you all have a good one too. Grace and peace to you. I'll see you next week.